In Derby ended today with a gang of men convicted of grotesque sexual abuse against children and teenagers. The men had groomed the girls for a role in forced prostitution. It's every parent's nightmare. But this case isn't an isolated one. In fact, it seems to have thrown a light on a very small part of what may be a very significant problem. Jackie Long has been trying to discover how widespread it might be.
He was like my owner and I was his dog, and that's how he sort of treated me.
This is not about negligent families. This can happen to anybody's daughter.
Child trafficking conjures up images of children from far-off countries being smuggled across international borders. But child protection agencies say it's happening here to thousands of children every year. Girls and boys, sometimes as young as 8 or 9, being ferried across towns and cities in the UK, sold for sex to gangs of men.
Emma Jackson's story, it's not her real name, is depressingly textbook. It began when she was just 13 and was befriended by a group of older boys in her hometown in Yorkshire.
They were nice looking, they had nice clothes. That sort of excited me, really. I was 13 at the time and, you know, you feel a bit grown up when you're hanging around people who've got cars and are like 17 or 16. I never at any point thought something's wrong. I was having the time of my life.
But at what stage did things actually start to change?
One of them singled me out. That must be how they work. He started to isolate me from everything and everyone, and he sort of became my world. He was sort of my best friend. He was always there. He seemed to understand everything.
At this point, there was nothing sexual about the relationship at all. Then suddenly, brutally, everything changed.
There was no build-up to it. It just changed. One night we were just hanging around and he took me up to the market stalls. He pushed me round the corner. He pushed me to the floor and started ripping my clothes off. And then some other men came and pinned me down and were watching while he raped me. And that's when things changed. Just one night out of the blue, he just raped me.
By now, so strong was his influence over Emma that she says the physical hurt was easily matched by a more unexpected emotion.
That's one of the sort of worst parts about it. You've not only got to deal with what they've done physically, but you've also got to sort of mend a broken heart at the same time. That someone's betrayed you. You know, they took your friendship and they've just betrayed you. Grooming is sort of brainwashing. It's hard to explain that sort of power they have over you. They'd been grooming me for a long period of time and they'd isolated me, so all I thought I had was them.
Within a couple of weeks of the rape, Emma, who'd never even had a boyfriend, was being forced to have sex with complete strangers. At various stages, threatened with a gun or told her mother would be gang raped. For Emma, saying no was never an option.
They would put me in a car and move me from one park to another park, from an alleyway in a town centre to a flat, and that's what they call internal trafficking. You sort of lost track. I think, you know, a lot of the time we were going to double figures, and they'd do things like lock me in a flat and put me in the bedroom, strip me, and would send man after man after man in. It was just like a revolving door. I was thinking they can't do anything more to me, but the worst thing they can do is kill me. But that would have been a lot nicer at that point, if someone had come and put a gun to my head and shot me.
Emma finally escaped after her parents, successful business people, were forced to sell up and take her abroad. They simply couldn't stop the scores of men continuing to phone and harass their daughter, who by now was becoming both physically and mentally ill.
Clearly, the men who do this are smart. They quickly isolate the girls from the very people who might be able to help them, their families. But there's another huge difficulty for the families involved in this situation. When they go to the police or social services to ask for help, they say too often they're not taken seriously.
Mike and Julia Mitchell, who've also changed their names, are a professional middle-class couple. They agreed to tell their story because they want to dispel what they say is the damaging myth that this only happens to the children of so-called dysfunctional families. Ellie was 13 when her parents began to notice she was changing.
Well, some signs were similar to the kinds of behaviours that most adolescent girls display. Things like being quite secretive, being challenging, being unwilling to accept parental boundaries, things like that. But I guess one of the differences was that we started to have some other worrying experiences too. Unusual phone calls. There'd be voices asking for Ellie we didn't recognise, and then the phone would be put down. When we asked her who these people were, she'd say, "Oh, it's a school friend," or "the brother of a school friend." There was always a realistic explanation, but we started to be quite concerned. Then, more and more mobile telephone numbers were scrawled on her school exercise books.
As the couple tried to become stricter to protect their daughter, though still unsure exactly what from, she became increasingly angry and distant with them.
We know that something was increasingly not right, to the point that we eventually approached social services for advice and help and support. Initially, the response we got was, "Well, this isn't really a big deal, is it? This is normal teenage rebellion, and aren't you being excessively rigid and draconian and strict, and loosen up a bit, let her have a bit of fun." It was very hard to be taken seriously.
Ellie began to run away, forcing Mike and Julia to have her put into care. But even then, she kept disappearing. Eventually, Ellie went missing for 2 weeks. She was effectively being held prisoner, locked in flats, forced to have sex with a constant stream of men.
When she was eventually recovered, she was stick-thin. She'd hardly eaten. She'd had a bottle of vodka a day, partly to keep her sedated. How to use another human being, a child, in that way is absolutely beyond belief.
The Mitchell family, at least, have had some justice. 9 men were convicted of a variety of offences earlier this year. Today's Derby case is another success. But campaigners know the stories of so many other children are going unheard by anyone.
Well, with us now, Martin Neri, the Chief Executive of the children's charity Barnardo's, and the child protection expert and former detective Mark Williams-Thomas. Martin Neri, harrowing testimony. How widespread is this?
We've been saying for some time, I'm afraid, that we think it's very widespread. We work in 21 towns and cities in the UK with about 1,000 children last year. I think it happens in every town and city.
Every town and city?
I believe this happens in every town and city. And if anything good comes out of this case today, it's that those who work with children, particularly teachers, but parents also might become aware of some of the signs of this sort of abuse.
What is going through the girl's mind? I mean, we heard a little bit of it there, that there's the initial flattery that older boys seem to be interested and there's a fast lifestyle on offer and so on. But what's going through the girl's mind?
Well, it's a grooming process. So what happens is the young girls are specifically targeted. So they'll target those that are the most vulnerable. And by that targeting process, these boys are only a couple of years older, so they're 18, 19 years old, and they'll flatter them. They'll buy them gifts, and they'll encourage them to come and spend time with them. They'll take them in their nice car. They'll then give them alcohol, some cases drugs, and then they'll introduce them over a period of time to older men. And this is when the exchange starts taking place. But what we've got is we've got young girls who are flattered by the older attention they're getting from a male. They then start to be completely confused. These are young girls who are going through all kinds of hormonal changes through adolescence, and they start to figure that this individual who is paying them an awful lot of attention becomes their boyfriend. They start falling for them, and they start loving them. And that is why it's so difficult to get these kids to come forward and talk to you and give evidence afterwards, because they're effectively saying, this man loves me.
Yes, and one of them talked about the feeling of betrayal when he discovered this affected love was actually, pure exploitation.
It's covered love. This love that they feel isn't real.
Now, you suspect it's very widespread.
Yes.
You think you said it was in every town, you thought.
Yes.
What's to be done about it?
Well, there are signs of this, and I think if anything good comes out of the case today, people might be aware of it, because there are things you can see which are indicators of this going on. A young person with some gifts and presents that she hasn't had, perhaps a mobile phone, money that she didn't have previously, because this process lasts for quite some time before the sexual offending takes place. The tragedy about this is that we've seen cases here where young people have been rescued, and the last case we heard, they had parents who were able to rescue them. Many of these children don't. They're carefully selected because they are vulnerable. They're perhaps in care. The tragedy, I've sat in coffee bars with members of my staff and some of these young girls, long after they've been rescued. They still talk about these men as if they love them because they were kind to them.
Do you think the police are taking it seriously enough?
Yes, I think they are, much more than they were. And actually, for these prosecutions, I think Derbyshire police are to be hugely commended.
But there have been a tiny number of prosecutions, and yet you say it's going on in every town. Does that really indicate the police are taking it seriously?
I think there's been a very significant change in recent years. With all the police services we work with, there's been a shift from going after girls who are on the streets, for example, to going after people who are curb crawling and the pimps in particular.
How would you improve the police performance in this?
Well, I think some of it's a lack of understanding, and I think today's case is really important because what we need to put it onto the public agenda, that these offences are taking place. There is grooming taking place of schoolgirls, and as a result of that, they are then being trafficked around the UK. We need to get, and police forces, by and large, are very good at this. And we've got the case today, but there's a number of other police forces I'm aware of who have got ongoing operations specifically targeting this type of offence. But what we need to do is we need to educate through schools, we need to educate teachers, parents, that these people are there because, after all, it's the children we need to talk to. We need to tell the children that these people who are coming to you and trying to be your boyfriend may not be there for the reason which is for good, but specifically targeting you in order to then make you available through sexual exploitation to other people.
Are there changes that should be made to the legal system when these cases get to court that ought to be thought about?
There are some issues. I mean, we've got some very good legislation in place, very good legislation to be able to deal with this. I think that we're getting more and more children coming forward and talking to the authorities because they're now confident that they will be believed and that their evidence will be taken. I still think we can improve the way that we handle witnesses at some stage because it's very difficult for these people to come forward and give evidence, and it's incredibly difficult for more than one person to come forward. Today's case highlighted that they got together and supported each other, but normally it's one child comes forward and it's really difficult to get anybody else. So we need to build up a supporting mechanism, and it's the likes of Martineri and Bernardo's and other organisations who are supporting these young children.
Things could get worse if local authorities who spend a little bit of money on this in the current spending cuts find they can't afford that money. We don't want them to pay for everything. We put a lot of money into this. But local authorities need to finance the sort of support services that organisations like mine provide.
And to be clear about this, I mean, you've referred specifically to children in care, but this could happen to a child of any social background.
Our experience is that overwhelmingly these are vulnerable children who are identified as being vulnerable, very frequently children who've run away from home. And running away from home repeatedly is a real indicator that someone might be trapped.
In that film there of a
course,
perfectly ordinary child from an ordinary family.
I'm not suggesting that doesn't happen, but overwhelmingly the perpetrators are very clever at targeting vulnerable girls who won't turn to anybody else and tell them what's going on.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. More traditional methods, tougher targets, different training for teachers, more powers to sack poor teachers and